Welcome to my review for the 2017 film Leatherface, which was directed by a couple of young Frenchmen sort of working in tandem. I've never heard of them before. I've never heard of any of their other credits, to be honest. Of more importance to me is the fact that this is the final film to date in this franchise. Yep, I finally got to the end of my review series. I've been sort of dribbing and drabbing these reviews out quite slowly over the past 6 months, but I have reached the end, at least until the 9th film comes out later this year or early next year, I'm not sure. But in typical Texas Chainsaw fashion, we can't just finish off with a straightforward sequel to a previous film. We have to do something completely different from the one before it. There hasn't been a single straightforward sequel to a previous film in this entire franchise. I guess the closest thing would be Texas Chainsaw 2, but I don't consider that to be a proper sequel. It's more like a black comedy spin-off. It shouldn't even really have the number 2 next to the title. Number 3 has nothing to do with number 2. Number 4 has nothing to do with 3. 5 is a reboot. 6 is a prequel. At least 5 and 6 are closely aligned, I guess, in terms of the characters they use. But 7 has nothing to do with 6, and today's film, 8, has nothing to do with 7. And I already know that the new film that's coming out soon, number 9, has nothing to do with this film, the 8th. So this is a really weird series in terms of continuity. I mean, it makes Halloween's continuity look consistent. So the story today sees a young Leatherface back in the 1950s get sent away to some kind of mental asylum. Yes, this is a prequel set a long time before the original film. I kind of presumed while I was watching it that it was just a prequel to the original, though I guess it could be a prequel to any of the movies or none of them, you know, just make your own mind up. So Leatherface goes to this mental asylum. The state has sort of deemed his family unsuitable to look after him. They don't have enough evidence to put these people away for the crimes that they know they've committed, but the least they can do to piss them off is to take their son away, which is what they do. After 10 years or so, a riot happens at this asylum and Leatherface is able to escape with a bunch of really psychotic kids. They sort of form this little posse and just flee the place and try and get as far away from the authorities as possible. And I guess the question is, has this decade away from his family made Leatherface into a more normal member of society, or will he quickly revert back to the ways that he was being taught before he was spirited away? I think we kind of know the answer to that question. So if I start with the things that I really liked about this movie, and first of all, just the fact that it's so different from everything we've seen before. Most of the running time is spent with Leatherface and his new chums as they go from the asylum to, I think they're just trying to flee to anywhere, but they somehow end up quite near the Sawyer farm. But it's like a road movie. It's like a horror western almost, with all these different villains competing for screen time, and it's really cool. I'm glad that they didn't just do the same old thing with kids wandering into Sawyer country, as I call it, like flies to a spider web, and then they end up in captivity, and a girl ends up strapped to a chair around a dinner table. Granddad's rolled out from a cupboard under the stairs, and there's at least one chase involving Leatherface. We've seen all that 4 or 5 times, so the fact that this film does something completely different felt really fresh, and I really liked the fact that I couldn't predict what the hell was going to happen next throughout this film. My next positive is the 2 psychotic lovers who are hanging out with Leatherface throughout most of the movie. I can't remember their names. I think the girl might be called Clarice. I'm just going to call them Bonnie and Clyde. They are like an evil Bonnie and Clyde, and I thought these characters were really cool. We don't really get to find out much about their backstory. The girl has got all these weird fire burns on her body, but it's fine that we don't get to find out too much about them, but they're great characters. I like the fact that they're introduced quite organically. There's no great entrance scene where the film is telling you, oh, these guys are going to be really important to the story. The first we see of the girl almost is when she's killing this other girl with a garrote in a dormitory, which is a great start for her. And the guy, he's in a couple of scenes before we even realise that he's going to be central to the story. Now, I'm going into spoiler territory now, so I'm going to give you a fair warning about that. This film does have some twists which, if you've not seen the movie, may spoil your enjoyment of it. So I'm just giving you a fair warning there. So Bonnie and Clyde, as I've now christened them, die surprisingly early, possibly even before the third act starts. So I liked the fact that the film keeps you guessing with what's going to happen. People are killed off when you don't expect it. I like the fact that Bonnie and Clyde are nothing to do with Leatherface and his family as well. I think if this film had been poorly written, I think they would have made those characters distant cousins of Leatherface, and they'd have ended up at the farm at the end and all together around the dinner table sort of cackling away at the fact that they've solved all their issues now and everybody's escaped from the institute, etc., etc. The fact that they're random psychos that are completely their own entity was a big plus for this film, I think. I like the character of Bud as well. Whilst I still thought he was Leatherface, because you do for the longest time in this film, I thought he was an okay iteration of Leatherface, but now that I know he's not him, then I like the character even more. He's so random with some of the kills he does. He kills the director at the Institute. He randomly kills Clyde in the woods. And in many ways, he's the most dangerous out of all of these psychotic people because you just don't know what he's thinking. And I like the corrupt cop as well, who's you totally get why he would be so pissed off at the Sawyers that he would eventually cross the line and become something of a villain himself. This whole film is almost like a horror version of Con Air. You know, you've got so many different psychos just fighting amongst themselves, and it is literally like a horror western, like I've said. And I guess Bud would be the Steve Buscemi character in the fact that he's so quiet, and you wouldn't think, just looking at this group, that he would be as dangerous as, say, Bonnie and Clyde. But he certainly is. And at the moment where he gets shot, I was like, what the hell? Because I thought they killed Leatherface at that moment, and I thought I must have been watching a dream sequence or something, but no, apparently not. That twist was very well hidden, shall we say. I haven't even mentioned the mother yet, have I? What a complete bitch. Now, the next thing I wanted to say is that there are so many great horror moments in this film which don't really have anything to do with the story. They're not integral moments, but they're just nice, colourful flourishes, great examples of creativity in the writing. So the corrupt cop played by Stephen Dorff, he's got this buddy who's also in the force, who's on the take. He's working in cahoots with the Sawyers, and near the end, they stab him in the back and throw him to these pigs. They're these really vicious pigs with tusks, you know, the sorts that were in the film Hannibal. So it's just completely random that these pigs get thrown out of the woodwork in the last 5 minutes of the movie, and we get to see them chomping down on this cop. It's great stuff. They've also got this trap in the barn with like an engine hanging off the roof, and it's perfectly aligned to this hole so they can kill people in a really kind of blunt force kind of way. There's lots of good stuff that happens in the asylum at the start of the film. These strobe lights go off when all the patients are trying to escape. This random loon jumps out of the shadows at one point and just goes to town on this nurse. And I've got to mention the diner scene, definitely Bonnie and Clyde's best moment. They just go berserk, they kill a couple of people in there, and then just for good measure, Clyde explodes this waitress's head with a shotgun. I mean, it's totally unnecessary, but for this movie and that character, I think it was earned, and I was like, yeah, okay, go for it. Let's have an exploding head moment. It was quite glorious, actually. And then we've also got this random caravan the main group in the film stumble across, where there's this dead body inside. I mean, is this something which can happen in Texas? You can just randomly stumble across a caravan with a dead body in it, and then we just get no explanation. It's just a normal thing. So many cool touches throughout this film, which I really enjoyed. And I guess for my final positive today, I'm going to mention the final girl, whose name I believe is Elizabeth. Now, this series has been so inconsistent in terms of the quality of its movies. There have been lots of ups and downs, plenty of downs, if we're going to be honest. But one thing it has been very consistent on is Final Girls. When I think back to all 8 movies, all of those films have great Final Girls, possibly with the exception of Texas 3. But the other 7 movies have great leading ladies, and this film is no exception. I think this nurse character, who's like the only good person in the main set of characters, I think she was really cool. It's a shame that she doesn't actually survive the movie. I get why they did it, they're going on the logic that if she was to escape, then she would bring the authorities down on the Sawyers, and then there couldn't be the movie from '74. But I don't think they needed to kill her. I mean, this being the '50s, I think she could have escaped and thought to herself, well, if all that the police force in and around Texas are corrupt, then can I really feel safe going to the authorities? Maybe I should just flee to California or whatever and put all that business behind me and not even go there. So on that logic, they could have let her survive. It's not a big problem for the film, but I did like her a lot. So it was a shame to me that they did have to finish her off in the end, but hey ho. Now for my negatives, and I guess I'll start with the ones that annoy me the least and work my way up to the really big problem with this film, which does bring it down considerably. But I'll start by talking about the film's opening scene where Leatherface's mum puts a chainsaw in his hand when he's only about 7 years old and tells him he has to waste this guy who's tied to a chair. Now, when I was watching this scene, honestly, I thought to myself, oh God, this film's going to be a piece of shit. I mean, I just don't think that this is how Leatherface as a character would have become who he is. You know, I've always pictured him being abandoned by society and to a lesser extent his family, and that he would develop all of his tendencies like putting skin on his face and his love for chainsaws just by floating around the farm on his own and doing it that way, not being engineered into becoming a killer by his parents telling him at a young age, okay, here's a chainsaw, you have to kill people. So I didn't like the opening scene, and the one after that's not very good as well. We see this young couple driving along and Leatherface tricks them into stopping their car, and there's just no way that this girl would then chase the kid into the woods. I mean, it's so obviously a con. If a kid was genuinely lost and scared and in need of help, he wouldn't be sat around in a silly pig mask. He just wasn't. He just wouldn't. So this film has a really slow start. It does get going eventually. Another weakness, though, is the ending. I mean, the film is really on the nose in telling you that Jackson has now become Leatherface. I mean, it's really overkill, the way that we see him sat around putting masks on and stuff, and the music gets a bit dramatic. And I was like, I got it 5 minutes ago that Jackson is now Leatherface. I don't need it drilled into my head. And I guess that takes me on to my final negative, which is a really big one, actually. Now, this film is really entertaining all the way through, but its central point, which is the evolution of Leatherface from teenager into man, is not very well handled. The film tries so hard to conceal its main twist that it makes Jackson a ridiculously over-the-top nice guy throughout most of the film, and then poof, he turns into psychotic chainsaw guy, puts skin on his face at the drop of a hat just because Bud dies. I mean, it's too much of a transformation in too short a time. It's just not believable from what we've seen of the character in the film up to that point. They should have given him some weirder behavior, you know, before the big twist. They should have just made him almost as bad as all the other people in the group, and then we're left to figure out which one of them is going to become Leatherface. As it is, it's really weird, this transformation. I mean, he's basically got this Elizabeth girl eating out of the palm of his hand. I mean, she is his, basically, and then because Bud dies, this fat kid, he's gonna just randomly then decide to start cutting heads off with chainsaws. It just wasn't believable for me. And I've never thought of the Leatherface character as being somebody for whom, you know, nurses would fancy the arse off him earlier in life. I just, not for me at all. So that does bring down the film considerably. Although I don't completely hate the twist, because the fact that it happens means that Bud then gets to become this really cool random killer when you look back on some of the stuff he gets up to throughout the movie. But yeah, on the whole, it's a shame because the movie is very entertaining, but you've still got to look at that central point and evaluate as to whether it works. And in this instance, I don't think it quite does. So let's get to the bag of terror then and find out what sort of score I am going to give for this film, Leatherface. We have 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. Now, let me just say that this film exceeded my expectations. From what I'd heard, I thought it was going to be much worse than what it was. I did really enjoy it. I mean, when you evaluate certain parts of it, you know, there's no way I could ever give a really, really top score to this, but I had a good time. and I would definitely add this to my shelf in the future if I got the opportunity. Now, I will be back very soon where I will be doing my rankings of all the films in this franchise. Hopefully I'm going to get that done this week. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.